Okay, tonight we are looking at understanding your teenager as part of our Parenting Power series, and I'm very excited about this. To give you a disclaimer, my disclaimer is that I have not yet finished raising my two teens. They are smack in the middle. Amelia almost 16 in 2 weeks' time, and Benjamin just turned 13. So I am wham bam in the middle of this. So I can talk from very fresh experience. I don't have any memory loss with how my children went through teenage years, but I also have not been to the other side yet. So I'm going to share some insights to you from research, my own experience, and from what I've read, to also share some, hopefully some wisdom with you, and from the Word of God as well, some for Christian parents who'd like to raise their children in a godly way. So we'd love that, to have godly teenagers, but it is our prayer, isn't it, is to have children who survive the teenage years and who end up becoming godly adults. And what I'm saying here is that prayer is then extremely important. Now, a third program in our series will be the power of a praying parent. I'm going to interview to a pastor and his wife, Miller and Annie Krokamp, who raised two children, who are now both married with children, and they offer parenting courses, and they have lots of wisdom on this. And I'm going to have an interview with them, but that is only going to be of middle October, so I'll release that then. And then the next program will be on challenges that our teenagers face, and how you as a parent can help deal with that. And that will be all the challenges with the current culture and those things. So for tonight, my focus is on understanding your teenagers. So first of all, we have to create the context so that you can just see what's going on with these children. And thereafter, I'm also going to add some tips and pointers and insights for parents on what to do. But the next program will focus on a lot of these dilemmas, like the drug, sex, alcohol, gender crisis that we have at the moment, and sexual orientation things, and especially from a Christian parent's point of view, how do you deal with this? This is something that is in my own life, and I'm also faced with this, so it's not easy. Okay, so for tonight, you're then going to hear some of the clinical picture of some research on understanding your teenager, and we'll look at the physical changes. And I'm not going to go into all depth with that because it's obvious, some things, but I'll give some insights there, and emotional things, and some intellectual changes that they go through, and spiritual insights as well, and especially some neurological inputs, just so that you can find your son or daughter where they're at, and understand their background and their challenges and what they're facing. Okay, so what I'm looking very forward to, especially the last program with Miller and Annie, and I believe that is a foundational input for you as a parent, is prayer. And I want to start off with a spiritual input here, that something that the Lord has laid on me and my wife's hearts, and that we have found to be extremely valuable, is that the challenge of the Lord was, will you surrender your children to me, because I love them more than you do. So that was the beginning of the more of a greater sense of peace for us, was to realize that they are only borrowed to us, in a sense that they are actually his children. So when we now pray for them, we pray in a different way. We talk to him about his children, and we share our concerns, and we even ask for provision for our children, but his children, and that helps to remind us as well that he is in control, and that he's got the bigger picture here, and then a story in the Bible that relates to this is if you look at Joseph's life. He was a teenager that was full of himself. Even his calling from the Lord gave him pride, and he angered his brothers, and they eventually almost killed him. But the Lord used all of those things to work his plan and purpose in Joseph's life. Jacob was just sad and heartbroken about his son, but the Lord was there with Joseph, even though Jacob was deceived by his sons. So meaning when you feel out of control, the Lord is still there busy working. And the Lord actually taught Joseph out of his arrogance and pride a lot of lessons, and he became a humble, strong leader. So the Lord is still busy, even though you're not so involved, and you feel like your hands are full of oil and butter and slippery, and you can't really get a grip on this. So knowing that the Lord is here makes a huge difference, and that He loves your son and daughter more than you. If you have a prodigal child, son or daughter that is running away from the Lord, that is involved in a lot of risk behaviors, we'll have a look at some of those things tonight. The same principle applies, that the Lord hears your heart, your pain, the anguish of your heart, and that He wants to help. And this is the process. This is the safest, greatest step that you can take in your parenting, is relinquishing control. It also means trusting God, even if something happens to your child that does not immediately seem to be beneficial, like Joseph being hurt by people and sold, and lots of things. Seemingly God has left the scene, but He hasn't. So for you, it's important as a parent to place your trust in your Heavenly Father, because you are also His child. So it's a parent thing, this, and you place your trust in the great parent. Okay, so that lays the foundation for where you're at tonight. Let's start off with understanding your teenager then. So in order for you to get to know a new person, a new friend, or anybody that you meet, a new person, what do you usually do? You ask questions, you listen, you try to find out what they think and believe, and what they've been through in life, and what they're dealing with at the moment, and how they see life, and what are they doing, and what are they interested in. And it's the similar process here with your teenager. It is a person that is growing and developing under your roof, and this is a person that you are living close to them, and you're observing their lives developing in front of you, which is a privilege, but yet it is also a strain sometimes. I have not pulled out my hair because of my teenagers. They left before the teenagers arrived, but some of you might have pulled out your hair out of frustration. But I'm giving you a principle here that it's the same process to get to know your teenager, and to get to see them develop and grow. It's also to show interest in their lives. A good thing is that teenagers differ. And so what we will do is we will apply the information tonight also with wisdom, because individuals differ, situations differ, but some principles are general and can be applied. I'd like to give you some hope as well tonight, that teenage years are not just tumultuous and terrible. In fact, only 10% of teenagers, according to research, really stray off the path extremely. The rest go within the normal bounds, and they hit here and there, and you get emotional ups and downs and those things, but they don't really crash and roll and burn and explode. Only 10% of teenagers really go that way. It is a risky time, however. Therefore, we as parents want to equip ourselves so that we can do the best to guide them through this time. Okay, so what's the point of teenage years? It is the one summed up in one word: independence. So they are in a process of becoming more and more independent and less dependent on you. If you think of pregnancy, the child is extremely close to the parent. They is extremely dependent on the parent. Yes, I believe in a baby that is unborn as a baby, a child, not a fetus. I feel very strongly about that because that is a person growing in there. And that person is developing, and the process goes after birth. There's a process that happens from there. That person develops, and there's less dependence on the parent then. A little bit more independence. They breathe more independently, they eat more independently, yet they're extremely dependent. And so the process goes slowly but surely. They become more and more independent. But it goes up and down, and later on they walk, talk, and then they reach a stage as teenagers where they start to develop a separate identity that's now much more complex, with an identity that says what's right and wrong, and they start to think, and so there lots of things happen, and in the end, your idea is to let them fly. But this process of becoming more independent is also a process of tearing apart. Sometimes it's a process of changing, and change always has some friction involved. But you, as a parent, want to learn how to manage this friction so that it isn't just fighting, but that it is necessary growth, and that you grow with them to allow them space to become, because now they're becoming bigger and bigger. So you have to adapt as well as a parent, and that's where you need wisdom and information. Okay, so your teens are becoming adults, and you're going to have the satisfaction of getting to know them for the rest of their lives, and growing with them and having a wonderful relationship. And that's the prayer, and that's my dream, is to have that relationship with them. But it can become very turbulent during those teenage years, and you can feel, how am I ever going to get through this? But it is a process. It's a process, and it will change. This thing, like my one friend Erich Schoeman says, it has this thing has an expiry date. So there will be a date of expiry someday where this teenage years will change. So what we'd like to do is I'd like to work with your perceptions as an adult and as the parent, and your views. People tend to see teenagers as arrogant, irritable, confrontative, young, too wise for their age. Yet they're also energetic, thoughtful, idealistic. They've got deep interests in what is fair and right, and they grow. So they're also interesting young people, although they are also very impulsive. But we'll look at all of those things. But the stress here is not doesn't mean that it's going to go. It's going to go into a crisis. The fact that it is a stressful time and that you have ups and downs doesn't mean that it is going to work out terribly. It's just being in the process, staying in the process, and going alongside them, with them through this. So adolescence is then a time of opportunity and not just of turmoil. Okay, so the media usually focuses on this and says, teenagers, you've seen that movie 13. Worst nightmare. Okay, and then it's normal for teenagers to develop differently, and I'll go into some more detail there. And teenagers they need a whole host of opportunities to develop. So we're going to look at those things as well, and then their context. So I want to first get into some definitions. Did you know that a teenager then is usually defined between the ages of 13 and 19? Traditionally, but we talk about adolescence, and adolescence is like it's the second decade of life, but it could actually start from as early as 8 years old. That's the period of transition from childhood into adulthood. It differs for genders and individuals, but it can last up till the ages of 24, 25. So adolescence and teenage years are not necessarily the same. But that's why you'll find many a 21-year-old you can still see that they are still developing, and that's okay. You see some 45-year-olds that are also still developing, and 55-year-olds, they're still stuck in adolescence. You get them as well. Okay, But for you to understand your teenager, there's a whole host of things you need to understand. Now, as a psychologist, when I see a teenager or a child, my first question is, what is going on in their world? I first look outside them, because the parents usually bring them and tell me, this is a problem child, fix him, And what I usually then do is I say, okay, wait, this child is what we call the identified patient, the IP, usually of a problematic system, a family or school system or environment that plays a huge role in this child's behavior. So I'm not excusing the child, I also work with them, but they're usually reacting to a lot of factors outside of them. Yes, and we'll see why. So understanding yourself and your family system is the first step to understanding your children. This is a difficult one. I'm a parent. And I look into the mirror, I see a beautiful young, handsome man. Don't comment on that. I have to, I'm going to edit that out. I look in the mirror and I have to see my own flaws. It's not easy. But it starts there, is to start to look at yourself, your own functioning, because you are the parent, you're the guide, you're the leader, you're the model. You're the person that they model after. It also starts with looking at your marital situation or the lack thereof, because that has a huge impact on the child. And I refer to 17-year-olds as children in this context and in this talk as well, because they're still in that formation phase. They're still dependent on the parents, although they're less dependent, but they're still underaged. And so it's important for you to have a look at your own parenting style, your marital situation, your family situation, and the events that you've been through recently. So in our lives, we've had a lot of losses in our life the last 2 years, many losses of people close to us. So it has a huge impact on our children, and financial pressures and COVID. And so first of all, you need to ask a question as to what is my child's, what is the bigger context doing to my child? How are they reacting to that? What demands are placed on them from their environment, from their world, from the school? Because a lot of teenagers at the moment are still going to school twice every second day. So you have a lot of impact of that on them and on their social functioning, their sport. So, this video could be watched in 3 years' time after COVID's come and gone. But the question is still, and the fact still stays, look at their context at school. How's the school situation? How are their friends? So you want to have a look at that. And we'll look a bit more at their social functioning. So asking questions as to how they're functioning in a lot of contexts, and what are the demands placed on them and how are they coping with that. That helps you to understand what your teenager is dealing with there, especially their friendships, and we'll look at the social functioning a bit later on. Then their needs, what do they need at the moment? What emotional needs do they have? Now you might say, I don't know. Yes, you probably don't know, but they always have similar needs to what they've always had. They need a relationship, even though they don't make it easy sometimes to have that. They need acknowledgement. They need confirmation, meaning of them as a person. They need to hear that they're good enough. They need positive affirmation, even though they sometimes elicit a lot of criticism because they act in certain impulsive, immature ways. They need achievement in some area of their lives to build that self-confidence. And they need spiritual guidance, and they need mentorship, and they need a role model, and they need relationship with you. They need that relationship. They need you to try to be consistent. They don't need a perfect parent. They need a present parent. Yes, a parent that tries their best, a parent that is willing to work with them through this. And then there's a whole host of other factors that we're going to look at, like their personality type or their temperament, their gifts and talents, and their birth order. Where are they at their birth order? So, what's the dynamic in the family? Are you a withdrawn, closed family that doesn't share outside, or are you a family that invites a whole host of other people out from outside? All of those things affect your teenager. If you're a closed family with rigid rules, it makes it difficult for your teenager to form an individual identity, because they're controlled. The control is very strict, and it's difficult to mingle with others, to compare themselves and to work with them, build strong relationships. So if you're in a household that has very enmeshed boundaries, everybody's over involved in each other's lives. Look at my Boundaries and Families video. You can click on the link, and then there's because that kind of family again doesn't respect boundaries, and that has an effect on the teenager and on yourself. Or are you a family that connects with a lot of other people? Are you very open? Some missionary families are extremely open. Their house is almost like a Germiston station. Everybody's there. Waterloo Station in London was like that. There's just everybody's just everywhere. It's like, and that can also limit some contact in the family. So what is the dynamic in the family? How often do you talk? Do you talk openly or not? Those things play a role in how your child is responding to you. Are the parents present? Do you spend time together? That kind of thing. And then to also ask yourself, what are they hoping to achieve in life? What are they dreaming? What are they obviously we've always asked them, what do you want to become? A fireman, an army man, policeman, or a billionaire. I want to become like Elon Musk, that kind of Don. Or their frustrations at the moment. So relationship, like I said, and have a look at my video, building trust with your teenager. There I talk a lot about building relationship. And then the Holy Spirit, His guidance here is incredibly important for you. If you're not a Christian and you're watching this, welcome. I'm so glad you're here. I hope that this is very beneficial for you. I'm going to share things from a Christian psychology perspective, but it's lovely to have people here who are not necessarily Christian as well. So that's great. Okay, so we need to ask all those questions, and then what we're going to ask next is, so what happens during a teenager's development? So, did you know but that area there, those couple of years are the years with the most rapid development in a person's life, actually. So it's all areas of development all at once. So it's a huge change. Now you have these massive physical changes happening to the teenager, and then you get different stages of development as well for different teenagers. And so these things. So what you'd like to ask yourself as a parent is, where is my teen at the moment? Are they an early developer? Are they a mid developer where they develop normally, or are they a late developer? So early developers usually, early developers with girls and late developers with boys are usually the ones who struggle the most, because they have the hardest times. Because girls who develop early are usually sometimes it's a sexual maturity thing. So in the one hand, it's as if their childhood is ending as well, and a new phase is beginning, but they're still in primary school. They might be in grade 6 or grade 5. Some girls as early as 9 years old. And what usually happens is that they tend to be self-conscious and embarrassed. So it's to remember where they're at, and some girls tend to have a lot of body fat with some obesity, and that also plays a role of being self-conscious. Yet it can lead to a sense of attractiveness if they develop earlier, but it can also put them at risk, because there will be more advances from older boys, and they might not be emotionally ready for that. And boys with early development, that gives them some status and attractiveness. leadership, and they do. That's what happens. They play sports, they get selected. But if they're late developers, then the opposite kind of thing might happen, where they compare themselves, they feel insecure, they feel they don't belong to the group, or they're still stuck in childhood. They might be ridiculed. So, and that might influence their self-image, and at least temporarily, Eventually, as we know, they all catch up and they all develop. Yet for you to have that sensitivity, just to ask, where are they at, is important. Now, if you're a parent who has a 2-year-old and you're listening to this, but you don't have a teenager, great. I'm so glad you're listening to this, because you're preparing yourself. Because it's always good to have knowledge about the developmental phase of your children. Okay, so it's for you as a parent, if you're sensitive to all these factors, it enables you to sometimes be proactive with how you're talking to them, having empathy, understanding them. Because a low self-esteem can lead to depression. And understanding some of these factors makes a difference. It is normal for some children to develop later and earlier. Those are all normal things, and nothing there is, and it's not because they eat too much McDonald's, or KFC and all those hormones in the chickens. It's not really the reason. Yes, a diet plays a role, but it's not as simplistic as that. But you have late development, and that has to do with your genes and your family and the medical conditions. Some children who are extremely athletic, especially girls, tend to have little body fat and then develop later on because you need a certain amount of body fat to kick off with the puberty. But there might be problems with the pituitary or thyroid glands or chromosome problems or those things, but usually it works itself out. So it's not something to be worried about. You can rather give some reassurance, but just to be attentive that they are struggling with that, and for them it is a crisis because they don't think ahead. They are very much in the moment, and there's a reason for that in their brains. But it's just to also know that did you know that their body parts develop from the outside in almost? So your feet and hands develop first. You usually see their feet come around the corner, and then the child comes, these teenage boys, and they get bigger noses and ears, and then the arms and legs start to develop. They get some length, but then their arms are too long for their bodies, and they might complain about that. I look like a freak, and they actually are not wrong, because they are out of proportion, but it's temporary. And then the inside stuff kicks in, and the rest, and the chest, and those things start to develop. So, and what it's important to remember is many a times before the physical signs is visible of puberty, they've actually started to develop hormonally and all those things way before that. So that's why you might not see some puberty. We wait for the puberty signs. They're in puberty now because their body has changed, but usually it starts way before that. And for those early developers, they might seem like adults earlier. They look like adults, but they are emotionally and cognitively not there. So these areas of development are not synced. They don't develop all at once. Physical and emotional, cognitive, over to the next phase, No. Physical might develop here, emotional here, cognitive here, and then emotional might catch up a little bit, or some physical here. They look like 13-year-olds when they're 16, but emotionally they're 18, but cognitively they're 15. So you have a mixed bag with your child. And it's important to know that they are still running this race, and they've got various lanes, and some are ahead and some not. So that's why you have these, they look like adults and yet they're children, or sometimes they act like adults and sometimes they act like 2-year-olds. So you have that balance between them, and you can't really, it's almost difficult to say, well, what's going on here? Okay, so what else is going on there? In their brains, they have a huge change in their brains. Their brains actually have massive changes going on. Now, I always say the Lord made me bold because I have to show you this beautiful frontal lobe. It's the prefrontal cortex, where you have this. What is going on here is that This area here is the executive decision-making area, where you make decisions as to planning in your behavior, you look at consequences, you look at all those various things that you decide, you take into account what has happened in the past, what is happening now, what is the effect of my behavior going to be when I do this, what will be the pros and cons. All those higher level abstract thinking takes place here. That manages the emotions and those things. But that takes a whole host of cognitive abilities to have that, and the teenagers are still developing that. So they don't actually have that fully developed yet, even up to the age of 25. That's why they still drive like hooligans when they're 23, and the insurance companies slam them for that on their premiums. Okay, so what actually happens is there's a desire for thrill seeking, for risk taking, but they don't really have that sound judgment yet. So that's why they sometimes take too much risk, but it's because their brains are underdeveloped. It's actually very interesting. The MRI analysis shows that various areas of the brain develop rapidly, but some are not catching up. Like I said, some of the areas develop and some not. So you have a lot of changes in the brain, but they're not there where, that's why they can't vote as well. It's because they don't take into consideration a whole lot of factors before they make decisions. Now, some are ahead in that respect. You see some teenagers really are a bit more mature before their age, but that's because they of their temperament as well, because of some parenting and some areas where they've had exposure to different thinking. But it's usually a case of emotional ups and downs, and because their emotion management, will have a look at that, is also controlled here, and part of that is there. Okay, so huge structural changes are happening, and your child's brain is not fully developed yet, so that helps me as a parent to realize, okay, wait. If their brains are not fully developed yet, then I'm not talking to an adult brain here. They might seem like they are sometimes an adult brain, and you might be surprised. But it's important for you to remember this is still a developing person. Because, when you're talking to a 2-year-old, you don't get fed up and angry when you do, but we do. But it's a 2-year-old and they're responding that way. But to remember a 15 or 16-year-old seem like an adult, and they also they need a lot of freedom, and we'll talk about that as well, but they are not adults yet. Okay, one of the big things that a teenager struggles with physically is their body image, the way the picture that they have of their physical appearance and how they think people see them and how they see themselves. A huge thing during teenagers, so that they worry about how they look. Okay, so what you need to do as an adult is, when you're aware of those changes, what we'd like to do is say to them, no, there's pimples, don't worry about that. Just for them it's a crisis, because it's got to do with acceptance of belonging, of who they are, and are they good enough. And it's not just a silly, immature phase, it is part of identity formation. So if we just brush over it or negate it or laugh about it or make fun of them or jokes about them, what it does is it harms their sense of self. And I'm not saying you should just put them in cotton wool and don't ever, no, you can make jokes, but it needs to be done out of love, with love, not laugh with them, not at them. And okay, it's important, coming back to the relationship, to sit with your teenager. The talks about sexuality and about those things are important. I know schools these days are very focused on that, but age-appropriate talks, and talk about it rather a bit earlier than later, and share from your own heart, your own thoughts and ideas. But that's a talk for a different time, is to have the whole talk about your child's sex education and about where they're at and what to expect and what not. But what it boils down is to the relationship between you and them, and how open you are, and how honest you are, and how vulnerable you are as well about your own flaws. Because you'd like them to talk to you about their fears and stresses about their own bodies, but those are so personal. So if you, with respect, talk in the same way to them, then that changes the relationship. It's important that you reach them where they're at. But for you to do that, you also need to be open about your own mistakes. What you'd like to do is to encourage the children who are early developers to stay away from older groups because of the sexual interest, and just to remember that they still need your guidance and your love, and they need your friendship, but they also need your parenting. So there's a balance between the two as well. Ooh, I've got so much to say. Now, when should you be concerned? It's normal for those teens to feel self-conscious about their appearance, but when they fall into a bit more serious difficulties, like if they start to really withdraw and have extreme fear of their peer group, especially in early adolescence, when they're between 10 and 14, that relates to anxiety and self-image and their self-esteem, or when they are really obsessive about their appearance and they want to change some things in a more permanent way. And obviously they say that but if there's even efforts on their side, like when they are excessive with dieting or exercise, it's just things to be concerned about, to take note of, because that means they're controlling something, they're trying to control something, to change something. There's an underlying concern there. And also to just note because that could develop into eating disorders or depression. Obviously, if they're being bullied or teased or excluded, it's important to check in with them on that and to try to make plans with them on how to handle that, and also look at their share, but that needs to be done with a lot of sensitivity and wisdom. How do they sometimes elicit rejection and hostility from people? So there's a whole lot of developmental changes that a child goes through, and I just want to show you a graph. I just want to see if I can. Sorry, I just want to show you a graph here that I can. I can't find it now. Right. Otherwise, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show that to you a bit later on. I'm going to post it onto the group. And it's a wonderful graph that shows the cognitive development of children and the emotional development and how they grow in the various stages. So it's important for you to see that. So the emotional development, like between 10 and 14, and then between 15 and 19, those are two separate stages for the teenager. And it's we know that they feel awkward about themselves, but here from the age of 10, they just feel strange, and they don't feel like their bodies are changing without their permission, and it's difficult. And they start to also notice their own feelings a bit more, an ability to express them, and that's where you come in to allow them to express feelings, but to teach them that on how to express feelings, not in an angry way, not in a blaming way, but in an effective way, talking about themselves. Now, here is the thing: is your child. You need to deal with your issues as well, because you will have your own stuck developmental issues where you've not developed emotionally, or you've not learned to communicate your feelings, or you're still focusing on your body image too much, or your own style of communicating with people are one of rudeness, or you push people away, or you have some addiction of some sort, you're still smoking like a schoorsteen, or whatever. If you've got those kinds of problems, then obviously you need to deal with them in your life first. Otherwise, it's hypocritical to say, you grow up, but you're still an adult child. So it's important, because they'll point that out to you if you're hypocritical, and if you're not willing to change, but you want them to change. Then it's the older they become, there's so much that happens with them, but they actually withdraw a bit from your affection, and they start to connect with friends. And the friends now, that's where the friends come in, that are extremely important. They need friends. They need when they're in the 10 to 14 age group, they connect usually with their gender-based friends, but they start to connect more and more with the other genders. And from 15 onwards, it becomes more romantic and those kinds of things as well. But they need friends, but that's where your wisdom and discussions with them come in, is to sit down and have discussions on friendships. What kind of friends they like to choose? Why would they like to choose that kind of friend? What are their interests? How do you choose friends? Because usually we choose friends that either accept us, or do we want to just change ourselves to fit into the group? So the key there is your discussion with them. So it's not that you are commanding them, you are guiding them, you are talking to them, you are talking with them about this. And you're helping them to see the consequences of their behavior. Again, that prefrontal cortex, you're helping to develop files in that brain that they can pull out and say, okay, when I interact with people, I need to have certain criteria that I look for when I'm going to make friends. They have to be trustworthy. They have to have godly values. I need to look at that in myself, but I also need to have what you're doing is you're talking through those discussions instead of just preaching and saying, no, you shouldn't, no, you can't, yes, don't, yes, no, because I say so. No, rather give advice in a sense, but rather share what you experienced through your life, and sharing your own mistakes, but also your own valuable lessons that you've learned. There you're giving them wisdom, because that's what a mentor does, and it's important that a mentor does that for their children. And then the independency grows and they become older, and as they engage with as they become more independent, they also engage with more ideas, and they become to develop a little bit more self-control. So that's the emotional area there. Now, we've looked at the physical things. Let's look at the social functioning. Here is the social area of development, and that's critical for a teen, because teenagers are extremely sensitive with social things, but they learn in the social groups. That's where a lot of their learning takes place. And the peer subculture that they have, the peer group, actually forms their own little culture, and that's where they have learned values, and they learn about interpersonal skills and about boundaries and about respect. Now, it's just important, that's why I say you help them to choose certain groups. Now, if you've got a teenager that's totally lost the way, now I'm so sensitive not to blame parents here, because psychologists could, in the past, was viewed to everything as the parents. If they talk about adult problems, everything is the parents' fault. Their parents didn't do this, they didn't give enough condensed milk, they gave too much Tabasco, or sunlight soap when you were swearing. I mean, all those things. But what happens is that, yes, we as parents have a huge influence, but we're not God. And even God doesn't. God's children also go astray. A whole lot of them. God is good and He's perfect, but His children lose their way. So, but He remains faithful, and that's your role as a parent, is to remain faithful, to be the pursuer. So now you're going to try and guide your child, but if they've lost their way, it has usually started prior to the teenage years, the losing their way, because it's got to do with, amongst other things, their context and the relationships, and a sense of love and importance and worth. Okay. Peer group helps them to move to that independence place. It's a safe place for them, so we want them to choose wisely, because they belong with friends. They give and receive support, and they learn about leadership. They learn about how to deal with the opposite sex, and it also helps them to define themselves in relationship with others. So you need to explore ways to involve your teen with various other teenagers in sport, but also at church. So what we're doing is trying to get our children to get involved with like-minded Christian children as well, so they can, because they have friends from various schools and various groups, but to try and involve them in those areas, because it's extremely important. A lot of parents these days are homeschooling. We're also homeschooling our one child, But we really need to work hard, even with a child at school, to form those relationships. Yes, get to know the parents, get to know the children, invite them over, spend time with them. Sometimes you might actually mean a whole lot to that child. It's also important to know that they will grow in wisdom, and they will also grow in how they choose friends. It will develop. Intellectually, your child develops a whole lot. Initially, they don't have a lot of abstract thinking. They can't really problem solve hugely, but that develops. But as their understanding of themselves increases, they now understand more of themselves. They can think about their own thinking, but that makes them more self-conscious. Then that's why they start to feel like they're the center of the universe. They think that everybody is looking at them. Have you seen that? And everybody is thinking about them, and everybody is looking at them and sometimes laughing at them. But it's because they become more self-conscious, and it might lead to some more insecurity. But it's just because they are realizing some things. They're developing meta-thinking skills. So, and which is good. But it's just as they process that awareness, they start to realize, okay, it's not that others are just thinking of me. I can think about my thinking, and that's what other people also do. But it helps them to look at other people's perspectives as well. Because if you can think about your thinking, then you can think about others' thinking. Some important things here, they actually develop their identity. You've heard that a lot. But that is who they are and who they're not, what they stand for, what they don't stand for. So for your teenager to develop that, it happens in conversations with you, about you sharing your family's values and your beliefs, and not forcing it, sharing it, giving examples from your own life. Yes, I'm not saying that you as a parent, and as the fathers usually, the fathers are usually the ones that lead the way. And that's what the word also says, is for you to be clear about your values in the family, and what you accept and what you don't accept. But it's not something that is forced into their throat. It's something that is discussed with them and talked with them. Some parents do it so relative that, no, you make your own choices, you decide what you want to do in this belief, that they don't actually give a lot of guidance. No, you give guidance, but you don't force them to believe something. And you rather talk to them, and you have open discussion, and you share, because you'd like them to, what we call, internalize your beliefs. But they won't internalize your beliefs if they don't know that you love them and care for them. And if it's a fighting relationship where there's lots of criticism, the chances are not great that they're going to internalize. The chances are greater that they will reject your values as a way to get back at you. Okay, so they are seeing you initially as perfect, but now they're understanding more things, and they're giving up this perfect parent image, and that's why they also start to criticize you. And it might be difficult because they point out your failures. My son once told me in the road, in the car, when I was struggling with road rage, for the 100th time I was confessing my sin and saying, "Oh, Benjamin, I'm so sorry. I'm asking the Lord to help me with this." And he just told me, "I don't think the Lord is helping you." You're not really listening to the Lord. So he told me straight. And there's some truth in that as well, but I also helped him to see, listen, we need to criticize each other, but we also need to do that. We should do that in love. Okay, then emotionally, to understand that the ups and downs are normal, yet if their ups and downs are to the degree where they lose a sense of control, and they lose so much control that they harm themselves or they harm others, and they're not able to really come back, and that's where we see the bipolar kind of mood disorder pattern, where it's extreme. Then we have to have a look at that, where self-harm comes in, or other harm of others. That's where you want to see where's the boundaries. But other than that, you would like to contain it within a relationship that says, I'm not going to reject you, I'm not going to leave you, but I'm going to be honest with you in a kind, respectful way, because that's what I expect you to do for me. I'd like you to be respectful and kind to me, and to be patient, and I'm going to try and do the same for you. I can't expect you to do something, like I said, that I don't do myself. And to remember that you'll have the paradoxes, the double, in a sense, they'll have these opposite reactions. They'll move between being dependent and then fighting to be independent, and between being impulsive and then suddenly showing signs of responsibility. Those are normal things. To be self-centered, shockingly self-centered, especially with family, and then with friends, there'll be these amazing, caring, touching, compassionate people, or with animals, or, in our house we've seen something similar. Or they'll be totally apathetic about what you care about and about your concerns and needs. You're ill, they don't care, but they're so passionate about these children who are in this dire straits in Ukraine or whatever. They're in various, they seem disconnected from the home, normal, or they have poor judgment, and then suddenly you see this amazing wisdom and insight and good judgment and critical thinking. So you'll have these paradoxes, so they want to be accepted by others, so they try and fit in, but yet they want to be unique. They try to be extremely idealistic or naive, they're like that, but then they can be critical about your values as well. So they're engaged in enthusiastically and charmingly engaged in conversations and causes, and then they're very distant and unapproachable. So they oscillate between these two extremes, or vacillate, or they can be very black and white, rigid. This is how it is, and then on the other hand, I can't decide what I want to wear today. That kind of thing. Or they think they know all the answers, and then suddenly here they can't make a decision. So, and then it's also important to remember that they are still trying to figure out their feelings, because feelings are fueled by hormones now. They're overwhelmed by it. And because they don't have an accurate view of themselves and the world, because their view is through the lens of these emotions and finding their identity and trying to be accepted. So your role as a parent is to love and accept them, even if they are sinners, because that's what the Lord does for you. Yet it doesn't mean that you're going to condone their behavior and that you're going to just accept their behavior and leave it there. You're going to address it, but use the Father, the Heavenly Father, as the example. He's very patient with us. He's extremely patient with you. He walks alongside you through all your ups and downs, your tantrums and sins and whatever. And He guides you and continues to talk to you. And sometimes He disciplines us. And the word says in Hebrews that it isn't pleasant. Discipline isn't pleasant. For the time being, it seems very hurtful and painful, but it yields a peaceable fruit of righteousness. So your discipline for your child will also not be pleasant. So they might rebel against it, but that's what you do with the Lord. But in the end, if you persevere, there will be a peaceable fruit of righteousness. So you just have to persevere in maintaining that relationship. So what does the Lord do? He just gives you unconditional acceptance. So you tantrumed, now you come and cry with Him and at Him and ask for forgiveness, and He forgives you, and you're there. Now I know teenagers sometimes don't say they're sorry. So what I do is I model that. When I've sinned against them, I apologize first. Usually, even if they've done something, I go and ask a question. Where is my share? And I go and apologize for that, because that models the behavior. And then I can also ask them that of them. And sometimes I actually put the words in their mouth if they are so stubborn, and I've given them understanding. I've said I can understand this about what has happened here. I apologize for this. Yet this is what I'm upset about, and this is what I'd like you to change. And if they struggle to verbalize it, and then I say, I'd like you to help you here to make peace with me. This is what I want you to understand and say. I even guide them like that sometimes, but I'm not patronizing, and it's also not scolding. It is talking through with this. Now, as they age, obviously the discussion becomes more complex, and it becomes more a little bit more of an adult nature. So the freedom with responsibility grows. So I give them more freedom, but with that comes responsibility, and I bring in the principles usually. Now, in the heat of the moment, no use talking. Talk after the heat of the moment. Also tell them that you are upset and angry now. I am upset and angry. I tell them, I am not in the place where I'm going to be nice. I'm going to sin now. So please, I'm going to take some time to calm down, and then I'll come back to you. And if I do that, then what usually happens is that I model that you can't speak out of your wrath. You can't, but I don't always get it right. I screw up. And then the Lord helps me to use that as a modeling for repentance and confession and making things right. So even your mistakes can become opportunities. And just to remember that teenagers are almost the center of the universe in their own minds, yet they are, and that also puts them under the spotlight. So they're so afraid. So your acceptance of them is almost like an anchor for a boat on this way, the wave you see here. That I'm going to love you, but it doesn't mean that I'm not going to address some things, but I'm not going to reject you, even though you reject me. Even though I experience some rejection, I'm not going to leave you. I'm not going to force you to change some things. I'm going to talk with you, and on health and safety and some of those dangerous things. We'll look at it next time. There you need to jump in and give some more stricter boundaries and consequences. Oh, there's so much to say. They also have a moral side of development. So there's physical, there's intellectual, there's social or emotional, and then there's moral as well. Their moral reasoning and behavior actually increases as they grow older. It's actually the brain that also develops those areas. Can you believe it? Extremely interesting, but it is a slow development. So it takes time for them to apply behavior, make mistakes, and then learn from it. Apply behavior, make mistakes, learn from it. And you are there to also help guide that process, that it isn't. Because sometimes what I've seen is that I expect them to now act. We've talked about it and I've said it. They must now change it while they're doing the same mistake 100 times. But to be honest with you, I have a sin that I've been battling with for 25 years. God is still patient with me. Yes, He's given me consequences. He's worked with me. Sometimes He was stricter than other times. He's given lots of grace, but I'm still battling with it. So I'm better, but similar there, moral reasoning and behavior takes time. So, and you're going to be the place where they're going to exercise that. So they're going to screw up and you're going to come back, and then later on when it's calm, talk about the principles involved. Not to shame them, not to induce guilt. How could you do this? You hurt your mommy's heart. No, don't go into the shame, guilt place or blame and reject. I'm so fed up with you. No, or you hurt me, I'm going to hurt you back. No, those are all immature things. Ne? You want to work with a mature approach to say, this is the principle. So you need to quit taking things personally and to develop a love approach that says, my child is immature, I'm mature, I've got the Holy Spirit, I'm going to work with this. Now, I've also screwed up here, but that's the principle to come back to for yourself. Is to, don't take their remarks or whatever personally. Go and see it within context. That this child, you have a responsibility before the Lord and you're accountable for your parenting role here. But He will help you, but it is going to take time. So they're going to make lots of moral reasoning and behavioral mistakes, and it is normal. And you're going to help them to distinguish between right from wrong. Because what they're doing is they're trying to please people to be accepted, and they're actually using their little subcultures values as right and wrong these days. And I'll look at it in the next program with teenagers who try to develop their own identity. Suddenly they're pansexual, or they're bisexual, or they're this or that, and they don't even properly know their postal address, but suddenly they know these things. So it's part of the identity development, and the challenge is for you to try to keep the relationship open, to try to spend time with them. Now I know they move away, and especially from mothers. From the age of 13, they start to move away from mothers. The fathers step in there with some additional time that they can spend. This is not everywhere, but it tends to happen because they want to develop their own identity. So the older they become, the more they will realize the shortcomings in their thinking. Like Mark Twain said, when I was 13, my father was an idiot. And as I grew older and older, and when I was 21, suddenly my dad started to become clever again, So you will become clever again in their eyes. But it's just to know that this process will change. And it's also good for me. What I found personally is that I try to I discuss subjects with them. I discuss topics with them. I have lots of discussions about sexuality, about behavior, and I try to explain sometimes to them certain things. Now, I'm not preaching. There's a difference between preaching and discussing. So I like to talk because that's the way I influence their thinking. Then there's another thing of when you're working with a teenager, if you go into an emotional battle with them, a screaming match, you are just going into the immature brain, the emotional brain. That's not yet developed with all of those skills that you are asking of them. So you have to be the one, it's hard news, but it works, that maintains the balance. If you've lost it, you come back, you repent, you maintain the balance. You are the one who's the steady one. They are the one who's going to end up here, and later on they're going to become more steady. So you're the one that when you're angry, you have to withdraw and then come back. Because the prefrontal cortex, neocortex, still not fully developed. But what does the Word of God say? Psalm 190. Now I'm going to go over the time tonight. If you want to watch this at a later stage, you don't have to watch it in one sitting, but if you want to, great stuff. So I'm going to continue because I still have a lot to say. So Psalm 119 verse 9 says, how can a young person stay on the path of purity? By living according to your word. Meaning there's a guideline. So the guideline also comes from your life, but it also comes from discussions in the home. How do we treat this? What's our values here? But they will test those limits, and they will have to, because we want them to internalize it. But for somebody to internalize something, they have to work with it. Think of your own teenage years when you go through here, their teenage years. Think back honestly, how bad were you? I was much worse than my children. Okay, so they are growing in all these areas. And all these changes, rapid changes, leads to lots of mood swings, insecurities, arguments, and stress. So you take a deep breath, and then after those things, you try and amend problems. Don't brush things under the carpet. Try to deal with problems if they don't want to allow you. There's certain areas where I say, look, I try to give a lot, in the calmer times, I try to give lots of affection. Lots of physical affection if they're the touchy-feely kind. Mine is, both of them, and I verbalize it, and I verbalize my affection, my love, so all the good times when there's not lots of fights, reach out, do nice things, invite them, and I really don't experience a lot of rejection there, but it did take time to win my daughter's heart. I really had to work at it from a young age already. I felt like she was in adolescence when she was born. She came out of the womb hitting the doctor. Who are you? So I had to work at really winning her trust. And that's what you'd like to win, is their trust. Okay, so there are 5, for their optimal development, there are 5 C's. Now, I wanted to, like I said, to share my page, and suddenly I couldn't, but I'm going to share this with you as well on the Facebook page. So the 5 C's that you want to have them develop is the competence, confidence, connection, character, and caring. So in order for them, what competence is the perception that one has abilities and skills to do something, to achieve something. I can do this. They want to develop some kind of competence, and how to do that is you give them opportunities to practice specific skills to academically. So you give them opportunities. Whatever it is, if they're good at handball, you give them an opportunity to develop handball. Now, I know some children do something and then they leave it, and they do something and they leave it. So then that's where your discipline comes in, to say, no, you've got to complete certain things. So you have to be, sometimes you'll have to maintain those boundaries and consequences, where you say, I'm going to I'm going to give them the positive and the negative rewards of their behavior. So if they'll have to get consequences of their behavior as well. But competence is what you'd like to develop, and then confidence. So that's that internal sense of self-efficacy and positive self-worth. Now, at the moment, we're working with one of our children a lot on confidence, and it's to provide opportunities where they can experience success when they are trying out something new. So we are intentional at that at the moment, and it's also got to do with your words. So how you talk to them and what you say is incredibly important, and then how you treat certain successes that they have, so that you do celebrate it with them. Now, I'm not saying that you're celebrating like, your child when they're 1 year, 2 years old or 3 years old on the toilet. They just made a pool by themselves. It is a huge thing at that developmental level. And here they might achieve certain things that you don't really see as that great, but it is great. So even if it is a verbal affirmation, it's important. Rather let them hear it from you than from their peer group, or go and seek for it online. I have seen scary things. And then connection. So that's those positive bonds, the relationship that I was talking about. But you want them to build those relationships with you, and relationships happen during time spent doing things. Whether it's watching Netflix, not too much of it, but watching Erich on Facebook, or being with their peer groups and interest groups, like stuff where you can join, horse riding club or whatever it is. And then character, that's that sense of right and wrong, and respect for behavior, and standards. And that's where you're going to do, what you're going to do there is you're going to actually expose them to your church life and to the cell groups. And character's got to do with giving them opportunities to also show self-control. So sometimes you're going to give them, put them in situations where they have to exert self-control. So we recently bought a whole lot of those small cool drinks, and our children did not always show self-control. So that's now a point of discussion. What happened here? Why is this like this? What do you make of this? So it was an opportunity set up to give it, not a temptation, but a situation. It's not going to be a disaster, but they did not manage that well. They didn't handle that responsibility and freedom well. So how we're going to use that now as an opportunity to discuss it, so you can create such opportunities, also through sharing your own heart and your own mistakes and things you've learned, and then caring. For them, they will develop a sense of empathy, but it is also based on their temperament, because the drivers don't have a lot of empathy. The Holy Spirit also works here to develop caring and compassion, but it's also about exposing them to people who have less than they have. These days, the research actually shows that our children gain things that they've not worked for. They gain too much. They gain a sense of entitlement. They've not earned a whole lot of things. Now, I'm not saying everything is works-based, but it's important that your sense of understanding for them to develop that, they need to care for others. So you have to create opportunities again. That's by volunteering. What we did is we take less fortunate children with us on holidays and stuff. So we take them to their place of where they stay, so they can see that and that they can share what they've got with them. So it helps them to talk to them, to play with them, to see how they live, so that they can develop that compassion. And obviously you're modeling it. Now I'm going to share with you some protective factors. That means what places your child, what makes the likelihood of them becoming a successful young adult, what promotes that, the healthy development, and what reduces the risk factors. So there are certain things that you as a parent I'm trying to actually also put your mind at ease, because many of you are actually giving a whole host of protective factors. I think the parents these days are sometimes overprotective, but South Africa being what it is in the sense of a safety, physical safety. When I was a child, I could drive with my little bicycle, could ride around the neighborhood. These days, we have to be in a closed estate in order to do that. It's not necessarily everywhere. In Prieska, it's probably different. But in Pretoria, that's the case. So you don't want them to just be at risk. So certain things are protective for their development. That's the opportunities you offer them. So you take them to good schools, you take them to church, you're taking them to good friends. Those are making a difference. You are building long-term relationships with them. Remember, when you are acting in towards them, you need to think of the future as well. Use your prefrontal cortex. The way I'm going to react with them now is that if I'm in 10 years' time and we both look back at this, how would I like to look back at this reaction that I'm having with my teenager now? How would I look back at it? But to build a caring long-term relationship, that is a protective factor. If you give them a chance to play tennis, sometimes our children have too many chances to develop, and they have too much stress and way too many things that they're involved with. Some children thrive on it, but some children have too much pressure and stress, which is unnecessary. But those opportunities are actually protective factors, because if you develop skills, you develop self-confidence, you don't have to go into drugs and seek bad friends, because you're developing your talents and hobbies and skills. And if you belong to a good group of friends that value you and that also have values to grow and to develop, that is a protective factor. And if you involve them in, if you work at the way they see themselves, and that's difficult, because some temperaments are extremely self-critical, but you from your side can just maintain that stance towards them of acceptance. They will work through their own issues, but you will be there, and you are a constant in their changing environment. And if you try to maintain a stable home environment, now some people go through divorces right in the middle of their children's adolescence, it happens. But then you need to be aware that this is a huge change agent, and you are crushed, but they are also going through a whole lot of, so you need support. You need physical, emotional support, spiritual support, financial support. You need a lot of support. So wherever you can reach out. And if you give them a physical home that is safe and healthy, that's also a protective factor. It's important then for you. And then positive risks. You need to encourage your child to take positive risks. So you give negative risks and positive risks. So they experimenting the risk taking is part of it, but then you want to encourage them to take positive risks, like doing a new hobby, meeting new friends, that establishes their identities and teaches them the successes and failures, and they learn from those things, like playing a new sport, learning a new language with them, volunteering, maybe saying, okay, I've done this, I'm going to go for that next subject there, new subject. Those are all positive risks, and you can talk to them about this. Can you see you are taking a risk? Can you see that how you're learning from this? You're growing. I use those things to reflect back for them, and that they can develop those reflecting skills, because that's what develops maturity. But then obviously the risk factors, the things that increase the likelihood of a negative result, are when you are extremely harsh and critical as a parent, or extremely distant and nonchalant. So those two extremes, either you're very harsh and controlling and you suppress their need for independence and for developing that internal sense of control of what is right and wrong, and then applying it and making mistakes and taking responsibility. No, you from the outside forcing them, that's like a controlling state. You have to do this. And you're taking away that individual sense of a choice and developing that. Now there's a balance between rebelliousness and in developing independence. Rebelliousness is a willful defiance that is defying the parental authority, but that needs to be addressed, definitely. But then the other side, there's also a time and a place to pick your battles and to say, I'm not going to address this small thing here. But a parent who withdraws from their own children emotionally, disconnects, rejects them, that leaves the child feeling unsafe as well. So your involvement is in the middle, is the place where you're involved. So the Lord talks about Ephesians 6 verse 4 says, fathers, not mothers, fathers, do not exasperate your children. Don't cause them to feel so frustrated and so helpless. Instead, bring them up in the training and instruction of the Lord. Now, that is a teaching on its own. But that means just be involved in their lives. Don't frustrate them too much. Don't leave them out and reject them too much. Be involved. Train them. Lead them. Instruct them. Teach them about the Lord. Be involved in their lives. Love them. And then children, obey your parents. But it's easier to obey a parent that is also showing respect. You see that? Hey, I'm preaching tonight, Eric. Preach it, man. And obviously, if they have a personality that has more of a positive, optimistic side to it, I love to acknowledge the reality of the challenges, but then also add some optimism and say, okay, this is the reality. Yes, you're feeling this. Yes, your nose is bigger than your face at the moment, but it's going to grow and change differently. Yes, you feel extremely sensitive and like a big pimple at the moment, but it's going to change into this beautiful thing here. So it's always to balance it. The good news is that only about 50% of teens say that there's a study done that up to 50% of teens have never or only engaged in one kind of risk behavior, like drugs or alcohol, or drunk driving or sex or whatever, or sexual activity. Most of them don't, but there is a quarter of teens that experiment, but only 10% of them lose their way, and then from them a whole lot also return back. So it's hope. So for you, when you are looking at your teenagers and you want to help them, you are looking at your own fears and worries as well, and that's where your relationship with the Lord comes in, is also to give your fears and your questions and your doubts to the Lord so that you can get wisdom and guidance from Him. You don't have to do this on your own. And if you've missed your child, you can still always fix something in the relationship, even though it is late. It's never too late to start. So I just want to give you some more things to understand your teenager. There are certain things that they won't be able to change about themselves: their size, their height, their shape, their sex, their color, their race. But there are certain things that they can and that you can work with. That's the type of discipline, the type of relationship, the type of exposure you give them, how you're going to handle conflict, how you're going to handle communication. They can't change their birth order, but they can change their relationship with their siblings and in the family. They can't change their IQ, but they can work on their skills. They can develop the talents that they have. So certain things that they can't change and certain things that they can. They can work on their diet and exercise, but they can't work on their temperament. But they can't change it, but they can work on the temperament. So can you see the balance there? So God gave us these children to love and to raise. And did you know that you as a parent is still the best one to raise your teenager? There's not a better place for them to grow up. And that you are still the parent that is the best for your child. The Lord has given you that child. The word says in Psalm 127 verses 3-4 that sons are a heritage from the Lord, children a reward from Him. Like arrows in the hands of a warrior are sons born in one's youth. Blessed is the man whose quiver is full of them. You see, so they're a blessing. So you can also ask the Lord to bless you. So for you, it is important to try to connect. Now, I'm going to spend another program. Hopefully, I'm going to try and get an expert on this as well, but on the basic temperaments, the 4 kinds of temperaments. I have an Afrikaans program with Hetty Brits on that. Maybe I'll see if I can get her in, and we'll discuss the 4 temperaments and all of the wonderful things, because it's important for you. In order to understand your teenager, you need to understand their temperament. Are they extroverted or introverted? Are they more task-oriented or person-oriented? Are they the old ways of sanguine, choleric? You remember those things. But these days you get the disc analysis to say the driver or the interactive one, or the steady, steadfast one, or the compliant, conscientious one. Which one are they? And how can you see them to understand them better as well? Some people say they are everything, they are all over the show. Yes, they might be, but they're going to develop into that, and that's going to help you to understand them and to work with their insecurities and fears. Just to give you some inputs on that, I just want to leave you with something there. that when you have a child that is a driver, usually they seem very self-sufficient and proud and unemotional and cruel sometimes even. But they need a lot of guidance to love. They need a strict hand. They need strong inputs, but they don't need aggression. They just need firmness, and they need consistency, and they need they have to work at their respect, and they need to work at love. And when you have an interactive, impulsive child, they're usually like that. They're weak-willed. They're unstable emotionally more than others. They can be very self-centered and undisciplined. So those are the areas that they have to work at more than others. And because they don't usually finish what they started, they want to jump between things. And when they are the quiet, steady one, the harmony one, they tend to be slow and unmotivated and fearful and self-protective and maybe even stubborn. But because they're so easygoing and loving, they can actually sometimes also not take on responsibility and pull through, and they can also be hurtful with people and bear grudges. And then you get the really sensitive one. That's me, the one that's this conscientious one, the perfectionist. They tend to be insecure and have critical. They can be critical as well, moody, unsociable. They can even be a bit harsh sometimes, and because they set too high standards for themselves. So you need to help them to lower the standards, make it a bit more realistic. They can be afraid of rejection extremely. So criticism doesn't work with them. Acknowledgement works with them because they're overcritical themselves. They're very loyal, so it's okay if they don't have 100 friends, but they struggle with their self-image, so it's important to affirm them. Can you see the various areas that you as a parent make a difference? Then there's lots of other wonderful things there that I will be talking about in a later stage. Okay, so for you as a parent, to keep, just to remember that this time, it's almost like a ship in a harbor. And what you're doing is you're filling the ship with all the stuff that it's necessary to survive on the open seas. And you don't want to let the ship out too early, but you also don't want to keep it in the harbor for too long. So you don't want the child to be so dependent on you that they struggle to find themselves in life, but you also don't want to let them out too early. So it's a process of keeping them there, but filling them up with love and acceptance and security and confidence, and have good memories with them, and to train them and to prepare them, to give them lots of experiences where they can develop themselves inside the home. And what that does is then what you'll do is you'll negotiate with them, and you'll see what they will do is they will go out and come back, and go out and come back. And it's okay. That's what they do. They experiment, leaving your safety. And sometimes they experiment with it too early, and it's normal, but they'll come back. And you just stay present, and you keep the door open and the relationship open and your love open. If you think of the prodigal son's father, he was there at home. Son didn't come home and then the father sold the farm and left the country. The father was still there. So you're going to give them more responsibility, but you're going to give them freedom, and they're going to make mistakes, but you're going to be there to deal with it as mistakes, not to crush them, but to deal with it. So that's part of it. And then there's that, as they go out and come back, at some stage they'll leave, and it's important. So for you as a parent, let's look at some specific things that you as a parent can do. And I'm just going to give you some ideas here. So it's what is nice for me to remember this with these various ideas is that it is normal for the teens to butt heads with you, but it's also important to remember that it is because they cannot really still express their emotions effectively. They don't really know how to say to you that I don't like being treated as a child. Please don't talk to me in this way. Would you please talk to me in that way? They just express this emotion. So you'd rather want them to identify the emotion. What is it that they're feeling? Why are they feeling that? Sit with them. It's going to take time. It's hard work, but it's temporary. You're not going to do this forever. And what is it that they'd like to convey? What are they conveying to you? And so it's part of listening. So they're not there. They're learning the skill to express their emotion. Some 45-year-olds are still struggling with that. They're still throwing temper tantrums, screaming their emotions out, blaming the other person, displacing their anger that they've felt with the boss. Now they're taking it out on the wife, and the wife's taking it out on the children is taking it out on the dog, and the dog's taking it out on the cat's taking it out on the birds, the poor birds. They are the victims in the story. So what you'd like to do is you want them to express emotions, but for you it's important then to remember the brain's not there yet. They're still learning about the flesh and the spirit as well, to follow the spirit. And they're still young probably in their relationship with the Lord. Yes, they will see from you as well how you handle the relationship with the Lord. I would also like to just add some inputs there. You can talk about your relationship with the Lord openly and about your own fears and struggles and problems. We share some problems with the family and then help them to trust with us and see the breakthroughs with the Lord, and that builds their faith. What is also important is for you to sometimes try to place yourself in their shoes. What are they thinking? What are they feeling? When you're calm, not when you're angry. Why are they going? If I was there, how would I go through this? And then pick your battles. Choose those things that you know are deal breakers, the values things, the things that are really, that's got to do with safety and value, the godly things, not the hair, not the nails, not the clothes. But if they're going to drugs and smoking and those kinds of things, you need to address those, because those lead to other friends and other places. But the painting their fingernails black or whatever, it's not going to be the crisis. You can have a discussion with them as to what is going on now. I know some teens who've decided to speak another language at home, and because you don't want them to now, out of rebellion, reject your faith. You want to talk to them through with this. It's not a preaching place. You might just ask questions and help them to understand, to reflect back so that they can make decisions. Because in 10 years' time, you're not going to phone them and tell them, hey, what are you wearing today? Or is your blouse too low? Or what? And then obviously your expectations, to lower your expectations in certain areas, have it appropriately, It's like what is acceptable behavior, some good rules. You can have all those things, the house rules. And they might seem unhappy with all your expectations, but they do need your boundaries. So it's good to have boundaries and expectations, but to talk through with really unrealistic expectations so that they can't be adults yet. They're still struggling, but you expect certain things from them. But your grace comes in that there's a learning curve. There's going to be many times that they're going to fall, but you're going to help them to stand up. It's also important for you. We'll talk about warning signs and those things a bit more. Another thing is, what about privacy? That's what I'm going to address next time as well, because now, and I'm going to address media as well, and phones and internet and those things. But that's important, and to monitor what they see on the internet. But in the end, you'd like to love your teenager, because they need your love. They need to, even though their attitudes don't always show it. They might seem that they push you away, but they actually want you to be involved. It's just staying the course and remembering to work with your attitude with the Holy Spirit, to ask Him to help you to not say things that are hurtful, and to try to maintain that relationship, and ask Him for ways to find that relationship, to bridge that gap with your child, and to show respect to them as well in the way that you treat them, because that's going to come back as well. And to don't have a lot of rules, have a few rules that are very clear, and set those rules, and then have consequences for them. But give more freedom. But I always discuss it with them. Freedom and responsibility go hand in hand. So now that you've not been able to handle this freedom, what's the next step? And I discuss it with them. So what's going to be the consequence? And so those are important. And try not to have silly rules that provoke them. Rules that are stupid, like no no makeup, or when you're 16, or stuff like that that are borderline things. Then you're going to have a huge fight over this. But really, in 2 years' time, you're going to go to a room and say you're not going to put on any makeup. And it's important that when you also follow through consistently, those things with consequences, that you do expect obedience for them when you have rules, and that you discuss the consequences, like I said, and that you then involve them in family things. They like to be alone. Say to them, it's okay for you to be alone. I understand you need more time alone. It's normal, because you also withdraw to find your own identity. It's got a lot to do with their self-consciousness as well, and then their own time and their own frustrations. So they withdraw and they try and process things by distracting themselves, but also to say, we'd love you to be involved in these areas, and to engage them. Also to engage them with things that are fun for them as well. I know I'm giving some things, and it's not so easy to do all of these things, but it will pay off. And if they've done something good, catch them doing something good. Reward them, even if it's a verbal acknowledgement. Tonight you came down when we called you, and it's great. Thanks for doing that. Always remember, the relationship is above the rules. It doesn't mean that you're going to let consequences and rules go, but the relationship is the one that you want to maintain above that. It's extremely important. And then it's also important for you to remember that in the end, this is going to work out all right. That's what we trust the Lord with. Thanks for listening for so long, and for being so patient, and for spending time here at Matters of the Soul. I hope that you will join us next time as well, when you're going to look at all the challenges that teenagers face. If you're watching this on Facebook, you can go to our YouTube channel as well, Matters of the Soul. Go and like and subscribe and follow, and please share. It helps us to reach more people. It was nice spending time with you. You're welcome to send me your questions. I love, and I'm going to answer those in a question and answer video. Great stuff. It was lovely spending time with you. As I said, I'm going to post some of those graphs and whatever on the Facebook page. God bless. All the best for you. Bye.